Have you ever opened a website and thought it was broken? Like nothing lines up and the fonts are weird, the colors are screaming, and yet somehow it still feels kind of intentional. Yeah, that's not bad design. That is anti-design. Whether you love it or hate it, it's one of the most rebellious movements in modern graphic design. Because after years of being told to simplify things, clean things up, remove personality, follow the grid, respect hierarchy, designers snapped. And instead of asking, how do I make this better? They started asking things like, how do I make this worse? Let's rewind for a second. For the past decade, designers have been obsessed with perfection. Minimalism took over everything. Flat design stripped everything down. Tech companies pushed for safe, clean, user-friendly interfaces. And don't get me wrong, that era made everything more accessible, more usable, more scalable. But it also made everything feel the same. Same layouts, same spacing, same fonts, same modern aesthetic copy and pasted on every single brand. You could swap logos between websites and no one would even notice. And that right there is a problem when it comes to branding. Because when everything is designed perfect, then nothing stands out. And if you've ever felt like you're scrolling through identical websites over and over and over again, you're not crazy. That's actually the side effect for everyone using the same design system. Design systems are amazing. They help people stay consistent. It makes it easy for everything to be efficient and scalable. But it also creates visual sameness. Everything starts to follow the same logic, the same structure, the same predictable flow. And eventually your brain stops paying attention. Because it starts becoming predictable, you start knowing exactly what is going to come next. So naturally, designers did what designers do whenever things start to get boring. They rebel. Enter anti-design. This right here is a movement that doesn't care about your grid. It doesn't care about alignment. And it definitely doesn't care about your good taste. In fact, it actually tries to break those things. You could identify if something is anti-design by clashing colors, awkward spacing, overlapping text, fonts that should have never been used together. And yet you see them on the same page anyway. Layouts that feel uncomfortable or unpredictable. And the craziest part, it is all intentional. Let's be honest for a second. Some of you probably hate this, like deeply to your core. You see a brutalist website and your designer instincts start screaming, align it, fix the kerning. Why is that button like that? And honestly, same. There is a part of every trained designer that just wants to clean it up. It is natural because we've spent years learning how to make things clear, how to make things balanced, how to make things aesthetically pleasing. So when we see something that rejects all that, it just feels wrong. But that discomfort, that's exactly the point. Now let's talk about Neo Brutalism because this is where things get spicy. Neo Brutalism, it's like anti-design's slightly more structured cousin. Still rebellious, still loud, kind of aggressive, but instead of living in complete chaos, its key features are actually raw and unpolished elements, extremely harsh contrasts, bold and almost confrontational typography, basic shapes, thick borders, and heavy blocks. It feels digital, but kind of like DIY. It's like someone built a website and they said like, yeah, I can make it prettier, but I'm not. And if you notice the style popping up more and more, it's not a coincidence. Brands started to realize that polished doesn't always mean memorable. In fact, sometimes it makes you invisible because then you blend in with everything that looks correct. And this is where anti-design gets very interesting because it actually flips the goal of design. Instead of asking yourself, how do I make this easy to look at? It asks instead, how do I make this impossible to ignore? And in today's world, that matters a lot more. We're not designing for a quiet art gallery space anymore. We're designing for feeds, for scrolls, for split-second decisions. You have maybe like what, 2 seconds? So yeah, some designers are choosing chaos on purpose. Because chaos, it makes people pause. And here's where I'm going to get a little ranty, because not all anti-design is good anti-design. This is where things can go very, very wrong. There is a very fine line between breaking the rules and not knowing them in the first place. And I need people to understand that. Because anti-design isn't about just throwing things together and calling it experimental. If your layout is confusing, if your typography is unreadable, your user can literally navigate away from your design. That's not rebellious, that's just bad design. And I will absolutely die on that hill. Because somewhere along the way, people started romanticizing ugly design without knowing why it's that way, without understanding things like why it works. They think ugliness is the point, but it's not. The intention is the point. Great anti-design is controlled chaos. It looks messy, but it's deliberate. It feels wrong, but it's still functional. It pushes boundaries, but in a way where you don't lose the user. And that type of balance is actually really hard to achieve. Because here's the irony. To break the rules well, you have to understand them first. The designers that do this successfully, they know grid systems. They understand things like hierarchy and typography. They know exactly what they're breaking. But designers that jump just straight into anti-design without knowing the rules first, I'm sorry to break it to you, but it doesn't feel intentional. It just feels confusing. And the audience, they're not dumb. They could tell. Even if they're not designers, they could feel it. And that's something I don't think we talk about enough. Users might not know design terminology, but they know when something feels off in a bad way versus in an intentional way. So yeah, anti-design is rebellious, but it's also strategic. Or at least, I think it should be. So let's talk about why this movement is happening right now. Because this isn't random. This is a reaction. Designers, we're cynical. We simplify things, then we get bored. Then we add complexity, and then we simplify again. And right now, we're kind of in the getting bored phase. Minimalism solved a lot of problems, but it also created new ones. Everything started to feel really generic. And in a world where brands are fighting to stand out, generic is the absolute worst thing you could be. And if you're a designer right now, you probably really feel that pressure. There's like this weird tension between let's make it look professional and we also have to make it memorable. Because clients, they usually want both. They want safe, but they also want to stand out. And unfortunately, those two things, they don't always fit together. So anti-design and Neo Brutalism stepped in and said, okay, how do we make this memorable? Even if it means being a little uncomfortable. Even if it means people don't immediately like it. Because sometimes being more interesting is more valuable than being likable. And honestly, that's kind of refreshing. But please, let's not pretend like this style works for everything, because it doesn't. You're not going to design a bank app like this, or a medical interface, or let's just say anything where clarity is initially critical. Context matters, audience matters, and function absolutely matters. And this is where being a good designer still comes in handy. Because choosing when not to use the trend is just as important as choosing when to use it. Anti-design is a tool, not a personality trait. And I mean that in the nicest way possible. Because I feel like we've all seen those designers that just like latch onto a style and they treat it like it's an identity instead of a choice. And that's when things start to fall apart a bit. Because in my not so humble opinion, I think the best designers are able to adapt. They are able to experiment. They use different approaches depending on the problem. And sometimes that means a clean, minimal layout. And other times that means a chaotic and expressive one. And sometimes it means intentionally making something look ugly, but ugly with a purpose. So next time that you see something that feels off or it feels wrong, don't immediately dismiss it. Take a second, look closer, and then ask yourself, is this bad design? Or is this design challenging what I think good design is? Because the answer, it might say a lot about the future of design, more so than you think. And honestly, we're not done rebelling yet, not even close. But okay guys, that's my rant for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more videos just like this because I make them every single week. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!